That's right, folks. It's time for With the First Pick, the CBS Sports NFL Draft Podcast. Happy New Year, everybody. This is episode 5. I'm CBS Sports Draft analyst Ryan Wilson, and I'm joined by our general manager, Rick Spielman, who has more than 30 years of NFL experience, including a decade as the Vikings general manager. On today's show, we'll talk a little college football playoff reactions to the bowl games and notable performance from some of those games. We're going to do a little segment called Just Good Football Players. We'll do a little news as well. And we'll talk about one of our favorite segments, Rick's Picks, drafting Harrison Smith, one of the best safeties in the NFL. He's been doing it for a long time. But first, remember, you can watch the show on the Pick 6 YouTube channel and get the audio version on your favorite podcast platform by searching With the First Pick. And since we're new, it would mean the world to us if you could like the video on YouTube. And if you're watching us live, join us in the comments or leave a comment or a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on Twitter, at Spielman_Rick, at Ryan Wilson CBS. And if you want to follow the show for updates and show clips, follow at WTFP Draft Pod or on TikTok at NFL Draft CBS. Rick, Happy New Year. How was spending the holidays with the family for the first time in ages?
Yeah, it was the first time in 31 years that I actually spent a whole Christmas day and actually a Christmas weekend with the family. So that was phenomenal. We ended up going to Universal Studios, which I highly suggest if you really like roller coasters and going to the Islands of Adventure, although I'm not getting paid for that advertisement. It was well worth the trip. They say Disney was crazy. There was 120,000 people there on Christmas Day, but in all, it was great. Just relax, just spend time with the family. To be honest with you, I did not watch one game of football for the first time in a long time on that weekend and just enjoyed the family.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. That's the benefit of being a podcaster, Rick. You have a little more free time on your hands and zero pressure virtually. I'll ask quickly, we'll move on. If I had to guess, you are not a roller coaster guy.
I tried the first roller coaster I went on, was the Hulk. And I think I got concussed on that because for the rest of the day I was done. So
you got to wear a helmet.
Even my older kids loved the roller coasters. So we there was a thing called Velocicoaster. I was like building up courage to get on that. But after my experience on the Hulk, it was I stick to the little fish that goes up and down in Dr. Seuss's Nickelodeon section of the park.
Hey, listen. Most important thing is to know your role, and your role. If that's your role, then so be it. All right, let's talk a little quarterback situation, because quarterbacks are always going to be a hot topic when it comes to the draft. And the very first episode over a month ago now, the first thing we talked about, and you weighed in on CJ Stroud versus Bryce Young. You're a huge Bryce Young guy. Your sort of all world comp is Steph Curry, which is a fun comp, and it actually makes sense when you think about how both these guys sort of carry themselves on the court and on the field. Bryce Young had a huge Saturday afternoon. CJ Stroud had a huge Saturday evening. The Alabama rolled in their game. Ohio State had a chance to win against Georgia. They missed the kick as time expired through no fault of CJ Stroud's. So let's revisit that again, because we'll be talking about this till the cows come home on actual draft night. Let's first start with CJ Stroud, and let's talk about what he did that perhaps we didn't quite know he could do over the course of watching him play the last 2 years.
Yeah, the biggest thing when you watched that game was that he actually made some plays with his legs. He's always trying to, and it seemed like when you watch the tape on the film this year and even last year, is that he's trying to prove that he's a quarterback and a pocket passer. And it seemed like he didn't want to make plays with his legs. And everybody talked about, and even some of the people I talked to at Ohio State, he is a better athlete than he's showing on the tape that you're watching this year. And then all of a sudden, someone unchained the beast. Mm-hmm. And it was for a national championship game. And his legs, not only did he throw the ball well, and there was no question about his arm talent, no question about his accuracy. I thought he got through his decision process a lot better against a NFL caliber type defense at the University of Georgia. But the difference in this game and what kept him in the game and probably had a chance to should have won that game was his ability to make plays with his legs. And that's so important now in the NFL, because you see all these quarterbacks are coming out, and the guys that are having success not only can throw the ball, but they can make plays with their legs.
Absolutely. And it's funny. I'm guessing, and you can answer for yourself, of course, but Bryce Young did what we probably thought he was going to do. It would have been a surprise if he played poorly because he's had such a successful season. I don't think he's changed anyone's minds in terms of where they have him ranked. He's still my QB1. I think he is yours as well. But I talked to a team last week before before Ohio State played Georgia, and I was told that CJ Stroud is going to be in the mix for QB1. And I think he solidified that conversation based on how he performed against Georgia. Anything changed for you in terms of if you're picking first overall or you're the team that gets to take the first quarterback off the board? Is CJ Stroud closer than he was 2 days ago? Is it still Bryce Young? Where are you at on that?
Well, and we'll probably go down this rabbit hole here in a little bit, but if Bryce Young, who I give all the credit in the world to, not only as a football player, as a competitor, playing in a Sugar Bowl, which is a big game, but it wasn't the Final Four, yet him, Will Anderson, Jahmyr Gibbs, all of those guys went out and played in that game. And that tells you the type of character and the type of competitor those kids are. And regardless, if you're sitting there and let's say Bryce Young opts out and doesn't play in that game, and the last vision you have of him was playing against Auburn, and then you have CJ Stroud, who, that would have been moronic if he didn't play because they're playing for a national championship or trying to get in.
Right.
But if you've seen the way CJ Stroud played, let's say, hypothetically, Bryce Young didn't play, then you would have a legitimate argument on, hey, maybe CJ Stroud should be the number one guy. But because Bryce Young not only playing, but playing and put an exclamation point on his college career and some of the throws he made, and I was very fortunate to be at the Sugar Bowl and be on the sideline and to see some of the things that he does in person up close is incredible. And that's why I think even though he is small, he is the exception to the rule.
I think you're right. I don't think I'm going to be coming off that because the tape is in. Like nothing's going to change unless we find out one of them, is a serial killer or something. And I don't think that's going to happen either. But as you mentioned, you were on the sidelines for Alabama, Kansas State. You've seen Bryce Young throughout the course of the season, and he is not big. We all know that. But also something we talked about earlier, he doesn't get balls knocked down at the line of scrimmage. It's not like he's Baker Mayfield who struggled with that over the course of the NFL career. It seems like he has an innate sense, of knowing where the lanes are. He moves well inside the pocket. He's not looking to run, but he can if you need him to. And then he throws with more anticipation than anyone in the first round conversation for sure when it comes to these quarterbacks.
Yeah, and it's incredible when you sit there and watch this kid and you say that he's small, but his instinct or his ability to slide around in the pocket, his vision shouldn't be a vision of a 5'10", 5'11" quarterback. His ability to find those open windows, his ability to anticipate where his receiver is going to be. There was one throw that, you sat in awe. He threw a deep ball into the corner of the end zone, I think for his first or second touchdown. And that ball was out before that receiver got out of his break. And to place that ball 40, 50 yards down the field in the corner of the end zone, and that I couldn't believe the receiver caught it, but it was such a perfectly placed ball where only the receiver was going to catch it, and that just kind of summed it up. I didn't have to watch the rest of the game, although he went on to play a great game for them.
All right, now we'll move on after this, but I want to ask you quickly because you're an old school guy, you're an old school scout. You like to have these guys playing these games. You've talked about that before, but you're also, I would imagine, of the opinion that quarterbacks need to be at least 6'2" and weigh at least 210 pounds or whatever. So you are, without reservation, giving Bryce Young your stamp of approval, even though he doesn't meet those height, weight requirements, right?
And I have a little bit of, I don't want to call it insider information, but I was down there when he played against Mississippi State. I have actually sat across this kid twice, just sitting there talking with him. I don't want to call it a formal interview, but just getting to know the kid. And there is not a more humble kid and a more mature kid that can handle all the accolades that have come his way. I mean, we talked about it earlier. There is nothing that is more important to this kid than what he does on that field and how he prepares to go out in the field. So you can take all the Dr. Pepper commercials and everything else that he's doing, and he somehow has a maturity level to separate that from what he has to do on the football field and how he has to get prepared to go out and play like he plays.
Yeah, no, it's a testament to him. It's a testament to the program in Alabama and, Nick Saban, what he's done with those kids. All the kids that announced we're doing this on Tuesday, January 2nd, and earlier this today. Will Anderson announced along with Bryce Young and, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs, who is also going to be a fun running back to talk about as we get through this process. So let's look at some of the other bowl games, the championship, the semifinal games, and we'll start with TCU and Michigan. And the expectation was that Michigan was just going to steamroll this team. They're going to run all over them, and that would be that. That is not how it played out. So we'll just talk about some names in general. We don't need to recap the show. That's what the Cover 3 podcast is for. Are
you cheating on me on another podcast?
No, I'm not on that podcast, but I watch it to catch up on the recaps. I do cheat on you on the Pick Six podcast, but
okay.
But Rick, you're my first love. So just that podcast doesn't mean anything. This is the one that means everything.
Okay, now we can go on with the show. We got that cleared up.
So I want to talk to you specifically about Mazi Smith, who's an interior defensive lineman, and Bruce Feldman for The Athletic, and he works for Fox as well and does a fantastic job. Comes up with a freak list every summer of just these insane athletic football players, and the 40 times, the bench press, the squats, all the things they do in the weight room to get your attention. And they may eventually one day be a first-round pick or just guys to watch as you go through the college football season. Mazi Smith, I think, was number 1 back in August, and the athleticism is there, and you see it. But for me, and not so much necessarily the TCU game, just over the course of the season, Rick, it's one of those situations where you have this guy who's a freakish athlete, who's strong, who's quick for his size, all those things, but it doesn't show up consistently on tape. I want to get your thoughts on what you think of Mazi Smith, the player, but also if you are in the same, are you thinking the same along those same lines as I am as an evaluator? How does that sort of mold your perception of when you want to take this player and what you can do with them once you get him in the building?
There's no question about the kid's athletic ability, but does it translate to the field when you're watching it on tape? And I'm just looking at my notes here, and I said that. I said, this is a big, thick, athletic nose tackle, but I don't see that athletic ability always translating to what you're watching on tape. I watched the Iowa game. I specifically said here, really struggled in Iowa versus the run, but then you see him flash, get off the ball, change direction like he looks like a linebacker and run down a screen in that same game. Then he go and he'll play with a high ped level. He'll give too much ground versus some of the double teams that he has to take on. Then the next thing you know, he plays with knee bend, jerks some guy, does some phenomenal quick twitch move to find the ball carrier and make the play. So that's what's going to go on in a lot of these draft meetings. You have this guy that has this, if you want to call it, or as you labeled, this freak athletic ability for his size, but you don't always see it show up on the tape. And the one thing that I will say, in the Ohio State game, you kind of saw what he can potentially be, because I thought that was his best game of the year. The question becomes, is he an underachiever? Because most of the guys that I've missed on were guys that had this freak athletic ability, but did not play up to that athletic ability, and it didn't show up every time when you put the tape on.
Yeah, and I've talked to scouts that cover Michigan, and they just wonder, how long do you keep saying this guy, it's going to work, and then it's when you're talking about maybe a top 50 pick or whatever, and then you have to come to the realization that maybe he's not a top 50 pick. And for me, last year that guy was DeMarvin Leal, out of Texas A&M. There's a lot of media buzz that he was a first-round pick, and I watched him play, and I said, okay, I'm not seeing it, and he ended up going in round 3. He's a good football player. He get a lot better, but I think sometimes the media perception isn't the reality among evaluators in the league, and we'll see how Mazi Smith, the pre-draft process goes for him. There's no doubt that he's physically has all the tools. It's just a matter of putting it together. Another player who's physically gifted, that's one word for it, and he's starting to put it together consistently when he's healthy, is Quentin Johnston, and he had a pretty big game for TCU as well. I'll just put this question to you. I'm not sure where your sort of draft mindset is on wide receivers, whether you want a big or a small guy just in general, but Quentin Johnston versus Jordan Addison, who is much smaller, obviously, and you have a need at wide receiver. Is there one guy you prefer to the other based on size, or is it a whole bunch of issues that you have to take into account?
Well, when you look at Quentin Johnston and his size, but as we talked about on an earlier podcast, he moves like a little receiver. He is a freak athlete that can run, but when you see him try to break down, make people miss in space, his ability to drop his weight, getting into and out of his cuts to separate from the DB, that's pretty unique for a big man. So if you got a big man with little man movement skills, that's a pretty unique trend as you go through. So he's definitely the number one receiver on my board. I've seen some big receivers that maybe I will call them slower twitched athletes, or just straight line speed guys. But this guy has it all. And I think as he continues to grow and develop into this league, he has a chance to be a superstar receiver in this league. And he has the most upside out of any of the receivers that I've evaluated so far as we get into this process. Addison on the other side, to me, and I said this before, he's Devontae Smith. He's smaller, but he's fast. He's elusive. He can make catches. He's very competitive with the ball in the air. He's competitive with the ball in his hands after the catch. And I think he's going to be a very good player as well. But I'm always going to go with the guy that has size, unique athletic ability, and he likes to play the game.
Yeah, Quentin certainly has all those things. And Addison, speaking of which, he is, I think he's injured. He's out of the bowl game for USC, but he has declared for the draft, which is also not a surprise. And he will almost certainly be a first-round pick. So let's talk about some players on the TCU side. Max Duggan, he'll be at the Senior Bowl, and he's probably one of the toughest quarterbacks in the NFL. In college football.
Well, he's not in the NFL yet, but
he could end up being one of the toughest quarterbacks once he gets to the NFL. But I think in a previous podcast, we talked about him likened him a little bit to Trace McSorley. He feels like a Taysom Hill type in that he's not a guy you want starting, but he's physically, he can offer something in the run game. I want to get your thoughts on this, but I'm guessing he's a day 3 target, a developmental guy. And when you draft these quarterbacks in day 3, in the back of your mind, in addition to the developmental part, are you thinking, okay, this is a guy that can run our scout team and help with sort of athletic quarterbacks we might face over the course of our schedule? Or is it a different mindset when you draft someone like that?
No, I would say he has continued to grow on me as this process has gone. And you look at him in the Kansas State game, in that Big 12 championship game. I mean, that gives you a pretty good glimpse of who he is as a player. But the one thing that you can't discredit him for is his competitive spirit, his leadership ability, how that team rallies around him. Now, he may not be the most gifted thrower. I watch him and he makes some incredible throws. It's like, wow. And then I see him leading receivers across the middle of the field, and it's like you're watching a movie and you're seeing, I know this is going to be a train wreck. Do I still watch this, or do I turn my head? And then you see the arm talent, and he's got a strong enough arm to make all the throws at the next level here. But then some of the deep throws, he's going to lay up and put too much air under the ball and underthrow some of the receivers. And I likened him to a little bit one of my favorite movies, Major League, just a bit outside on some of the throws when he goes. But then he'll miss a throw, he'll make a mistake. It's like water off of a duck's back. He comes right back in, and the next thing you know, he makes some plays with his legs, and he will battle you till the end, until that final whistle blows, and he's going to give you everything he has, and that's going to appeal to a lot of teams. And I wouldn't be surprised, depending on what he does down at the Senior Bowl, and I'm very excited to go down and see how he stacks up against some of these other, I would say, second-tier type quarterbacks, because you can't discredit what he's done for TCU. And the reason TCU is in the Natty, or the national championship game, is a lot to do with Max Duggan, who wasn't even starting in the beginning of the year, and actually, I believe, was beat out before he came back on the scene again.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I wanted to bring that up. So, right, he wasn't the starter at the beginning of the year, and he said, I'll be the best backup I can be. And it sounds hokey on some level, but when you're an evaluator, how important is that to hear from a guy that you want leading your team at some point?
Well, usually some of those guys will bail and just say, I'll ride this thing out, and then maybe hit the transfer portal, which seems to be the popular thing to do now, since there were 8,000 transfers in the portal this year.
Crazy.
But that tells you that this kid is a competitor. And even though he got beat out, he stuck with the program. He kept believing in himself. And usually when he got the opportunity to start again, they couldn't get him back off the field. And he is the reason why TCU is in the national championship game right now.
Yeah, it's a fun story and sort of a reminder that just because you're not a 5-star or you're not starting at the beginning of the year or the end of the previous year, it doesn't mean your NFL future is dead. It just means sometimes you're not in the right place, and sometimes you don't have the opportunity. When it comes, you have to sort of seize it, and Max Duggan has done that and then some. A guy who seized the opportunity in that TCU game on the losing side was wide receiver Ronnie Bell from Michigan. He'll be the Senior Bowl as well. 6 catches, 135 yards. And if you just turned on one game this season and watched that, you said, oh, Ronnie Bell's a first-round pick. Ronnie Bell's not going to be a first-round pick. He'll probably go in day 3, I would imagine, in part because he's not in the same athletic conversation as Quentin Johnston or Jordan Addison, for example. But there are things that he may do at Michigan against Big Ten opponents that he will struggle to do at the next level against NFL defensive backs. But when you see a performance like that, does that sway your opinion at all? Or you know who Ronnie Bell is? He just had a good game.
I think you have a pretty good idea of who he is. So when I broke him down this year, just reading through some of my notes, nothing really special stuck out on the film from a physical standpoint. He's had some durability issues in the past. The best asset are his hands. He can really catches the ball well. But he looks to me like kind of a one-speed receiver upfield in the routes. Really struggled to separate deep. Most of his production came on underneath and short type and intermediate throws. He does need some route work, but he does have some quickness into and out of his breaks. He's not an electric playmaker with the ball in his hands after the catch. So I don't want to call him an average Joe because he's better than an average Joe. But what is going to separate him from the rest of those receivers maybe in that third day, if he goes and runs well at the combine, if that may move him up some, but you always have to go. Not one game does a player make. And it was great to see how he performed. And he performed in the bright lights on a national stage and came through for them. But I think his ceiling is limited because of the lack of top-end speed and the lack of the top-end athleticism.
Yeah, and I don't want to undersell him. You're exactly right. Now, credit to him. He made a lot of tough contested catches down the field in that game to keep that game close. So
key point, contested.
That's right. And that could be good if you're a glass half full guy, or it could mean that you're not winning with speed off the snap, which is to your point. Fair enough. All right, let's talk about the Ohio State-Georgia game. And let's start with the biggest matchup in my mind, Kelee Ringo versus Marvin Harrison Jr. Oh. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably the best player in next year's draft class. That's not a quarterback, and maybe even is a quarterback. I'm sure Caleb Williams would like a word about that, but he's a special player. He would be the first wide receiver taken in this class. He might be a top 5 pick. Kelee Ringo has routinely been mentioned as cornerback 1 in this class, and I talked to you about this earlier. If we look back at last year's cornerback, the 2 guys that went Sauce and Derek Stingley Jr., and then a few years before that, we saw J.C. Horn go 9, and I think Pat Surtain went 10. Kelee Ringo is probably a distant 5th in that group. You think that's about right?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. I think he's behind those guys. I know he has phenomenal size. He's a good athlete for his size. But when you're stacking all these corners up in the draft, and we're going to talk about this a lot more, Gonzalez from Oregon, and one of my favorite guys, Porter Jr. from Penn State. All these guys, their litmus test, and the guy you want to watch them is how did they match up against Harrison, and were they able to shut or at least keep him in somewhat under control? Because I agree, he's probably going to be the best non-quarterback coming out in next year's class if he keeps going the way he's going, and he is definitely a difference maker. But you're measuring these corners on how they match up against an elite receiver like that, because they're going to face more than one elite receiver in NFL. They're going to have to face those probably on a weekly basis. The issue I have with Ringo is I didn't think he played up to the same level to match what Harrison did. And Harrison had a big game, and I didn't think Ringo had such a big game. And that was a chance for him to go out there and show that, hey, I am the best. I am the number 1 corner in this draft. But coming out of watching that game, I don't know if that's the case or not. And I even like Witherspoon, your corner from Illinois, who I think is a small, but he's a heck of a football player.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So I think I'm at the point in the conversation, and this isn't just because of this game, but I've been thinking about it, and as we go through this process of watching all these players, Keely Ringo is not going to be my cornerback one when it's all said and done. He may not end up being a top 15 pick, and we'll see how that plays out. But you mentioned your guy, Joey Porter Jr., and I charted every snap he had against Marvin Harrison when they played back in the fall. So there are 32 reps, Porter versus Harrison. Harrison finished 3 receptions for 40 yards. Of those 3 receptions, Porter was playing zone on an over route, and he didn't follow him. So, I mean, that's one catch. That's not on Porter. Another, he's playing 10 yards off, and Stroud hit Harrison on a hot route. So, again, it was a 10-yard route. He only got 3 yards after the catch. That's not necessarily a win by Porter, but it's not a loss. And then Harrison versus press man beat Porter with physicality at the top of the route on a dig, and he made a contested catch in tight coverage for 11 yards. Again, that's not the worst case scenario for Joey Porter. If it forces Marvin Harrison, the best wide receiver in college football, to make a contested catch on an 11-yard completion that required everything to go right from the snap to the quarterback throw to the route run by the receiver. So we didn't see that consistently from Keely Ringo, and I just think that's probably something we'll be talking about as we go through this process. Another guy that didn't flash in that game.
I'll just tell you, Porter shut down your guy too, I believe, from Purdue. Your
Charlie
little
Jones,
rat hole player, yeah,
Charlie, yeah,
that you love in the 3rd round, who was a heck of a football player.
I love Charlie. I don't know if I love him in the 3rd round. I sentimentally I do. I think he'll probably last longer than that. But yeah, Joey Porter is legit. Before I move off of Joey Porter, let me ask you this, because this is one of the, not concerns, but one of the things I noted about Joey Porter, and it happens a lot in college because the rules are a little different. What happens when you get a cornerback who's so physical at the top of the route that he would get called for holding on every play in the NFL, and he gets away with it in college?
Yeah, that stuff you're hoping is going to get corrected with coaching, because that's why it takes some of these corners. Rarely do you have a Sauce Gardner do what he's doing in his first year. But a lot of these corners aren't going to get away with what they're able to get away with at the college level. And that's a lot of grabbing and a lot of things that happen down the field. And plus, it's only usually a 15-yard penalty, where in the NFL, it's going to be a spot foul wherever you're down. So all of that to me is technique. I think what separates some of these guys and what you try to find out as you go through the pre-draft process is, can they locate the ball in the air and do not let the receiver make the catch? So there are guys that I've seen that, okay, I'm not going to touch the guy. They're in perfect position, but yet that receiver goes up and it makes a play because they can't find the ball in the air. So what you're trying to do is do a lot of drills, a lot of things, a lot of tape you're going to try to cut up so your coach can see, can this guy make a play on the ball in the air when he's in a contested situation, or is he in the hip pocket of the receiver, and does he have a knack to go and make a play? That was the big question, and I don't want to jump to another guy, but on Gonzalez, when he left Colorado and ended up going to Oregon, and then this year, okay, he all of a sudden, I think he had 4 interceptions, but all of a sudden you see another big corner, but the question on him was his ball instincts and awareness, and you can tell that he really developed that and was much better this year at Oregon than he has been in the past.
And you pointed out he could be in the conversation for CB1 too, depending on how this thing plays out, because again, another big long corner with ball skills. So let's talk about another player that didn't have his best game, but I don't think it matters in the draft sense. But Jalen Carter, you didn't hear his name called a lot, just in terms of watching over the broadcast. Any concerns, anything to worry about there? No. Or it's just, right, you just watch the next game and say, okay, he'll be back.
Yeah, no, but you do see some flashes now. There was a couple of times when he wanted to turn it on, and he went around the Ohio State guards like they didn't even put a hand on him. So when he wants to turn it on, I don't know if anyone can block him at the collegiate level, and there's going to be a lot of pros that are going to have a hard time blocking him as well. The question may come back to is, why is he not doing that every snap, especially in a game like what was at stake last Saturday night against Ohio State? So that may come into question. So you're going to try to get those answers as you go through this pre-draft process. We used to try to even cut out. We knew all the good that these players did, but when we brought them in for interviews at the combine, we try to cut up a lot of their bad plays or plays that they didn't show effort and try to hit them directly. Why are you playing like this? Or when I see this snap, why don't you play like that every time? So those are some of the things that these kids will get challenged with when they're sitting in those interviews, because you want to really dig down and try to find out who these kids are. And, the tape doesn't lie. The tape is your resume. And so you're going to show these players some of these clips where maybe they were loafing, maybe they didn't get off the block. Then all of a sudden he looks like he's unblockable. Well, why aren't you showing that on every snap?
Did you ever get any responses when you confronted players with bad tape and their response to you made it clear that you didn't want to draft this person?
It was all, rainbows and butterflies when it first came in. How's your family and blah, blah, blah. Let's get on this tape. And then all of a sudden you see little beads of sweat starting to come up on this. And then it's kind of start rolling down the side. It's kind of like when Pete Prisco starts getting with us on some of these drafts and you start to challenge him. He sweats a little bit now where you put him under pressure.
Yeah, Pete's got a lot of catch-up work to do too, and he'll he was peacocking earlier about he's on me about Mac Jones because I was a Mac Jones guy, but we'll see. There's time. The jury's still out on Mac Jones. You can't, as you've noted, Rick, you can't give up on a quarterback after a year and a half.
Are you giving up on Zach Wilson after a year and a half or two?
I am. That one I got to sell that lemon because I don't think that's going to run.
No.
We'll see. All right, let's talk about another player on the other side of the ball for Ohio State on the defensive side, Zach Harrison, who we haven't talked about yet on this podcast. He is long. He is 35-plus inch arms, and he looks the part. He passes the eye test, as you like to say. I don't think he's particularly bendy based on what I saw over the course of this season, but he flashed. Talk about flash. He flashed at times in that game. And Georgia has some dudes that are going to get drafted. Broderick Jones is one of them. Their offensive tackle who's going to go pretty high. What do you see about Zach Harrison, and what do you think about him overall over the course of the season?
When you see watch his body type just on tape, it's like that's the first guy you want to jump off the bus with. So you can say, here's our team. And they all look like him coming off the bus. So he's a first team all bus player. What I didn't like about him is I do think he plays hard. I do think he needs some time to develop, especially with his pass rush moves. But he was one of those guys when I watched tape, and I didn't get back to see this game this past weekend, but when I watched tape on him earlier during the season, he was more disruptive than productive. And what I'd like to see is a little bit less disruption, a little bit more production, especially when he can close and get to the quarterback. And those are some of the things I think technically can be cleaned up. And I do agree with you, whether you want to call it bendy or a little stiff through his lower body. Those are the things, because he's not going to be one of those edge finesse type pass rushers. He's going to have to come off. He's going to have to one arm you. He's going to have to use speed to power to collapse the offensive tackle into the pocket. I don't have any question about the effort he plays with. I just think, and I don't want to say he's non-instinctive, I just wish he was more productive than disruptive.
Gotcha. And before we move off this game and get on with the old podcast here, I scribbled this down, and I'm curious what you think about this, because you're big on these players playing in these games. You talked up how important it was for the Alabama kids to do it and what it meant to them. And at the end of that game, you saw them, pretty emotional that they got through this thing together. Even though it wasn't a national championship game, they finished with a flourish. And, they're all huge Nick Saban guys, this, that, and the other. Do you think Ohio State wins that game if Jackson Smith and Jigba plays?
I don't know, because I don't know the extent of that hamstring injury.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a factor all year. So I don't know how long this hamstring bothered him or if he ever fully got back healthy. So, yeah, if he was healthy and you saw the player that he was last year, he definitely is going to help them and potentially win that football game. But I don't want, without me knowing exactly how severe or significant that hamstring is, it's hard to discredit him. But if a player is healthy and is old school, if you want to call me old school or however it is, when you got a chance to throw the ball out into the schoolyard, go out there and compete. Don't turn it down, because there were some players that I watched that were getting interviewed on TV. Their teammates are out there busting their hump to win a bowl game while these guys are sitting on the sideline eating hot dogs, saying they're getting ready for the draft, getting interviewed by all the media people. And I don't know, that would bother me as a competitor and as a person. If I've been with that team and I've been with these guys for 3 or 4 years, and I've been through training camp and I've been through all the ups and I've been all the downs, I want to go out swinging with my teammates. And so that's what bothers me the most. I'm not saying they're not competitive. I'm not saying that they're not going to be really good football players in the NFL. But when I saw every Alabama kid and every Kansas State kid go out there and compete in that Sugar Bowl, and it wasn't for an advancement to get to the national championship game, that spoke volumes to me of what those kids' character are and what their football character is.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And look, I'm not going to begrudge Smith and Jigba for choosing what he thinks is in his best interest. I was just legitimately curious, because that you could argue they should have won the game anyway had they made that field goal at the end. CJ Stroud played, had a fantastic performance, and credit to him for that. I think they would have loved to have had Smith and Jigba out there, but clearly he wasn't. All right, let's talk about that Alabama-Kansas State game again in more detail here. We've talked about Bryce Young and our love affair with him. Let's talk about your dude, Felix Enrique Uzama, the edge rusher, number 91, who is another physical freak, to use my term there. And he went up much of that afternoon against Tyler Steen, the offensive tackle for Alabama, who will hear his name called on draft weekend as well. What'd you make of that matchup, and how did your guy fare?
Which guy? I liked both of them, but I do like the defensive end from Kansas State. And so I wanted to really hone in on that matchup to see, who was going to win that battle, because Steen, I knew if he was able to go out there and perform, and probably he's a borderline right now, 3rd, 4th round pick, because he's a big athletic left tackle. I just wish he played a little bit more grit at times. It anchored a little bit better versus power, but he has all the physical traits that you're looking for to develop as an NFL offensive lineman. What drove me a little crazy was when they reduced the defensive end from Kansas State. What I mean reduced is they put him head up over the tackle, or between the tackle and the tight end. And that's not what his game is. And so you have a 250-pound, 55-pound kid trying to hold the point versus these big, massive bodies in line. And even as a pass rusher, trying to run upfield on these guys in a small area. All of a sudden, there were about 5 or 6 snaps I seen they put him in a wide 9 technique, or outside the tackle of the offensive lineman, outside the shoulder of Steen. And when they put him on the outside and he pinned his ears back, he got a quarterback hit. He drew a holding penalty, and that kid was a going Jesse coming off the edge. And that's how you have to use him if you're going to draft him.
So let me ask you that, to follow up on that. When you're playing sort of a wide 9, you're not as able to help out in run support, at least, maybe setting the edge perhaps. But does that mean he's situational early on in his career? Like, what's the game plan?
I think you have to. Yeah, I think those are the discussions you have in your draft meetings. Okay, this kid is a very good player and a very good pass rusher. If you get him on the outside edge of a tackle and let him cut loose and get upfield and get after the quarterback, where he may struggle, if we're going to say that we're going to reduce our defensive ends and play him at what we refer to as a 5 technique, or head up on the offensive tackle, or in the gap between the tackle and the tight end, he's going to have a hard time probably not being as productive rushing the passer. And he'll hold up against the run because he does play with heavy hands, but he's not going to be as effective as when he's lined up wide.
All right, so let's talk about, and you like Enrique Uzama a little more than I do, but I'm coming around on him.
Keep watching, you'll like him.
No, you're right, and I have liked Tyler Steen from the start. I think you're right about He's not going to go. He's going to be a top 10 pick, but that doesn't mean he can't be a productive NFL player. But let's talk about some of Tyler Seaton's teammates. And this is one of my favorite players, and I've loved him going back to the start of the football season. And I know you're high on him as well. And not talked about much nationally over the first few months of the season. People know who he is now, and I thought he had a really good game. Safety, if you want to call him that, but he plays a lot in the slot, and he can do just about anything. Brian Branch, number 14?
14.
Yeah.
14. Yeah, no, he is in Alabama's defense called a star position. It's kind of a nickel hybrid safety / nick corner. He had a big game this game. I mean, he had an interception. He had a sack. He's physical and run support. He can cover. I think where teams are going to have, if he does come out, what the question will be is I think his best position at the NFL is going to be free safety. But you really never see him play in the deep half of the field. So what you're guessing is he going to be as instinctive of a football player when he's back that deep and as he is when you see him playing over the slot right now? So those are the questions that will be asked. I think he has all the physical traits and ability to be an excellent free safety, but you really haven't seen it. So that part of the equation, you're going to have to project.
And his teammate in the secondary, Jordan Battle, had an interception on an underthrown wheel route, I believe, in that Kansas State game. High point of the ball, made a great catch. He is not the athlete, I don't think, that Brian Branch is. And even though he plays much more in the deep half of the field, what does Jordan Battle give you if you're an NFL team in terms of bringing what does he bring to the secondary?
Well, what he brings is his instincts, because he may not be as athletic, but he's a well-built, well-developed kid. But he knows, and he has a natural awareness to put himself in position to make plays on the field. So that's what, if you want to go into our good football player category that may not be the, going to win the gold medal at the combine this year, but know how to play the game, that describes Jordan Battle to me. He's going to get exposed some, I think, in the NFL with the more space he has to play with. But what he'll make up for lack of athleticism will be his instinct and his natural feel as a football player.
Yep. No, I agree with all that. And I think it's a situation where you could get him, he could go on day 2, but if you get him even on early day 3, that doesn't mean he's not going to play a lot. That doesn't mean he's not going to be productive, because I'm guessing you would agree, if you're an instinctive player, but not the athlete, you'd rather have that than the high-end athlete who's not instinctive. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we talked about a little bit earlier, is the high-end athlete that's not instinctive or not a good football player. Those are the guys I missed on. Those are the underachievers. They don't play up to their ability they should play up to, or they're just not natural at playing the game of football. There are other kids that end up having great careers that may not be the gold medal winner at the combine, but they know how to play the game. They have natural instincts. They have great vision. And to me, that's what Jordan Battle is.
Absolutely. All right. So let's move on to the national championship game, which is January 9th. It'll be next Monday. We'll actually do the pod before that, and then circle back and get back to what happened in that game. So we've talked about Quentin Johnson. We've talked about Kelee Ringo. We talked about the Kelee Ringo didn't absolutely, have his best performance against Marvin Harrison Jr., which is, there's no shame in that, but you would like to have seen it. So let's say Kelee Ringo bounces back and has a dominant performance against Quentin Johnson. That's what you want to see. And then the follow-up is, what does that change about your perception of Kelee Ringo? Does that just reassure you that he can actually do the things that he needs to do against NFL-type wide receivers? Anything else? What do you take away from that?
Well, part of the evaluation process is, if you did not have a good game, how do you respond the next week when you come out? Or the other thing that's very interesting to see is, if you follow these kids on social media, and all of them are on social media, and the fans are ripping these kids on social media, and they say, well, I don't pay attention to that, or I don't look at it. Someone's telling them in their ear, hey, the fans are all over your rear end right now because you played like dog crap last week. So, and I'm not saying Ringo played like dog crap. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But he didn't have his best game. So now, when he didn't perform to his best, but yet this next time he plays on the field, it's for a national championship game, and you have a chance to redeem yourself, that'll be interesting, and that'll tell you what kind of player that this kid's going to be in the NFL.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I'm looking forward to this matchup, and I would imagine that Keely Ringo is a competitor, and he wants to show out. And to your point, I'm sure he's heard what people are saying on the old internets there, and that's something that he will take into consideration. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back, and we'll talk more draft stuff because it's the Draft Podcast. We'll be right back.
I've never lost a wingman.
You're lucky. Fly long enough, it'll happen. It's been an honor flying with you.
Top Gun Maverick, rated PG-13, now streaming on Paramount+.
All right, we're back. We caught Rick sneaking some candy there. That's all right.
I started to choke. I was getting all choked up on this podcast.
I bring out the emotion, folks. I can understand that. So we had wide receiver rankings on the rundown. We're going to circle back to that to a later episode because that'll stay for a little bit. I want to touch briefly on the draft order, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. We're 45 minutes in already, so we'll pick up the pace a little bit here. So I wanted to ask you, Rick, as we sit here, Houston still has the number 1 overall pick. The Bears can steal the number 1 overall pick depending on how week 18 goes. But if you're the Chicago Bears, you have Justin Fields, and I'm assuming if you're the general manager, let's say you're sold on Justin Fields and you get that number 1 pick, what's the thought process in terms of what you want to do on draft weekend, and what are you doing between now and then to take phone calls, talk to people in the combine, whatever? Because do you want Jalen Carter / Will Anderson? Or are you entertaining calls to trade down to fix a team that has a lot of holes?
Well, I think that if Chicago does end up with the number 1 overall pick, I'm guessing, but I'm going to take a pretty good shot at this, that they're going to say that number 1 overall pick is up for sale, because you hear it every year.
Right.
So, and the reason it may be up for sale is because of this quarterback class, and whether it's CJ Stroud people are in love with, or Bryce Young. Chicago's going to say, well, if you want to come up and get your guy that you think is the franchise quarterback in the future of your organization, that we will trade that number 1 overall pick. And they can accumulate a bunch of picks and really help their roster, because they do need a lot of help. If they can't get out of that pick, and let's say they do end up with a number 1 overall pick, they are in a lot better shape than I think Jacksonville was last year, because I think both Carter and I think both and Anderson are better players than when Jacksonville had to take Walker last year. So they're in a win-win situation, in my opinion. If I were Chicago Bears, or if I was going to take the first non-quarterback in this draft, I would probably lean towards Carter, even though I think Will Anderson is going to have a major impact on a team, whoever drafts him. And I know that kid personally, and what a humble, mature kid he is. Just another fine example of the type of kids that come out of Alabama. But Carter is a much rarer, if I can say that, prospect, because it's harder to find inside 3 techniques or inside under tackles that can dominate the way he can. And look at when the Rams took Darnold, and what a difference that 3 technique. They had some good edge rushers, but when you can find an interior player that can dominate the game, that is a rare find, and you better take advantage of that if you think that player can do that.
Yeah, especially Aaron Donald at that size, because he was undersized or whatever the talking points were at the time, and it turns out he's exactly the right size. So one other thing I want to mention about the draft order as we sit here, if the Raiders had beaten the 49ers in overtime and the Raiders played an inspired game with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback, they would no longer be in position to take a quarterback, which I had them doing in this latest mock draft. I had them taking your guy, Will Levis, and Will Levis was the third quarterback.
Why is he my guy?
I don't want to be my guy, so I'm pushing him off on you. Look, maybe he'll be a Hall of Famer. I'm skeptical based on what we saw. We'll see. So I had him at the third quarterback off the board. The Raiders took him at 7. 2 picks before that, the Colts took CJ Stroud at 5, and of course our guy Bryce Young went number 1 to the Texans. And I mentioned all this because if the Raiders had lost that game to the 49ers, or had they won that game, the Panthers would still be in pole position, or at least top 3 position, to get one of these quarterbacks. So now they're on the outside looking in. They're sitting currently at 9th. I had them taking an edge rusher, which is fine. That helps. but it certainly doesn't help in the way a franchise quarterback would. So, Rick, if you're sitting at 9, you need a quarterback. Your owner is very serious about getting a quarterback. What are your options if you're perhaps tired of going the free agent route because Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield haven't worked out? Like, how do you get back in the mix?
Yeah, I think the ownership down there is very enthusiastic about getting a young franchise quarterback to lead that team. And, Steve Wilkes has done a phenomenal job. And, they were right in the mix to win the NFC South, except they forgot to run the ball or couldn't run the ball last week. But that's a whole nother conversation. But you're going to have to do everything you can to try to go up and get one of these 3 quarterbacks, and probably whatever that costs. And you're going to have to overpay because teams know that you're coming up not to get a player, but to get a quarterback. So that's going to put the price tag a little higher. I mean, you look back at what Chicago gave away when they went up and tried to get Trubisky and how much that cost them. And you can see if you go through the draft history, especially over the last couple of years, and someone is locked in on a quarterback and think this is our guy that's going to lead our franchise, I don't care what it costs. We have to go get this player because we may not be in that position again. But Carolina, similar to Indy, now Indy have played horrible, and so they're helping themselves actually to try to solve their issue at quarterback. But if I'm the ownership and I'm the general manager down there, whoever the head coach is going to end up becoming, I know I better go get one, because if I say, well, we'll wait till next year to get one, you may not be around next year. So you better do everything you can. Or I think Carolina will do everything they can to go get a franchise quarterback in this year's draft class.
Any consideration, and scouts that I've talked to are very nervous about Anthony Richardson as a top 15 pick for many of the reasons we've talked about. Any consideration at 9 that you would take Anthony Richardson there as quarterback 4?
Well, let's see how the rest of this pre-draft process goes. But there was a guy that opted out of a bowl game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And had a chance to maybe go out there and show that, hey, I am the top quarterback, one of the top quarterbacks in this draft. Will Levis opted out. The 2 guys that are in the pole position right now, as you may want to say, that is the leading the way on the top 2 quarterbacks, both played. So we'll see how the rest of this pre-draft process, but there's no question, if you watch him on tape, he is probably the most gifted athlete with the most gifted arm out of anyone we're talking about. But the inconsistencies and the thing that teams are going to really want to dig in on him is he take his craft seriously? Does he put in all the time, all the energy it needs to take, that he needs to put in to be a successful NFL quarterback? Or is he just going to go out there just like he kind of did in college, where you didn't see that big a jump from last year to this year? You see the freak stuff that he does, but his passing percentage was still, I believe, below 60% or right there. I don't have the stats in front of me. But does he have those intangibles that it takes for a quarterback to be successful in the NFL, besides just the freak physical traits that he possesses?
Yeah, he's incredibly raw. That's one of the things. And the teams I've talked to said he's a good young man. I don't like to call him kids. I mean, he's a good half a foot taller than I am, but he's a good kid. He's a good person. But in terms of the ability, the willingness to work and all that stuff, we'll find that as we go through the process. But yeah, that would be a gamble at 9. It feels like Anthony Richardson, even though you watch him play sometimes, it just takes your breath away. All right, let's turn to a segment now that Rick, you actually sort of came up with, perhaps accidentally. Just good football players is what you like to call these guys. And I think it's not a backhanded compliment. It's a way to appreciate guys who aren't going to run 4.3s and who aren't going to jump 45 inches and who aren't physical specimens necessarily, but they're guys you want on your football team. And we talked about Jordan Battle in the sense that he's not going to be the best athlete, but he's an incredibly smart football player, and he helps your football team. You have some guys that you've identified in our first edition here of JGF. I'm making that part up there. Who do you want to go with here?
Are we going to get T-shirts made up with that?
Yes. Right after we get our
I would just like a podcast T-shirt. I'm going like no sponsorship today, just a plain black T-shirt.
Yeah, the wheels are slow when it comes to merch here. We'll get on that though, Rick.
Yeah, my three guys that I wanted to kind of point out, and the first time, we talked a little bit about this last week, but John Michael Schmitz, the offensive center from Minnesota, when I watched him on tape, he is just such a mature, savvy vet type player, and he's big, he's physical, he's very good in pass protection. He can fit in any scheme. He doesn't get a lot of love out there because he's an offensive lineman. But if I had to make a comparison to who I thought he reminded me of when I watched him on tape, it was Travis Fredericks when Dallas drafted him at the end of the first round. I thought they had very similar skill sets when he came out of Wisconsin to what I seen Michael Schmidt do at the University of Minnesota. And he played very well in his bowl game. He wasn't an opt-out guy.
Which bumps him up a full round grade.
I like full round, well. Yeah. He's top 10 now.
I liked him as a day 2 guy. Where are you at on that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I think he's a Friday guy. I think depending on the depth of the first round and all those guys that can rush the passer are going to go, guys that can catch the ball. It'd be interesting, in those conversations when you're developing your draft board and you're getting into that lower first round, top of the second round. And I'm going to kind of propose this to you. If you have a running back there, which is devalued versus, a guy like Michael Schmitz, who I think is a heck of a football player that can anchor your offensive line. Do you take a swing towards that offensive lineman and wait for the running backs in this draft? Or do you take a Gibbs, potentially if both of those are sitting there with your pick?
I like that. So I'll switch the tables again. I feel like this is
can you answer a question? I mean, I can ask questions too. I can't be all the answer.
You're exactly right. Yeah. So when you were saying that, here's what I was thinking. I was thinking if Rashawn Johnson is there and John Michael Schmitz there, I might lean Rashawn Johnson, our guy from Texas, the running back, who has, as you pointed out, low mileage. He'll probably be a day 2 guy. He played behind Bijan Robinson, but he does some things well, special teams value. And I feel like there's some other centers in this class that I like that may still be available after John Michael Schmitz goes off the board. But I don't know if there's a ton of Rashawn Johnsons out there. What do you think about that?
I think there's a ton of good running backs coming out because you can get value on running backs as you go through second round, third round, fourth round. I mean, Pierce, who's playing very well down in Houston, wasn't a top first round pick. The kid from Florida playing with the Commanders right now is playing at a high level. He wasn't a top round pick. So you can find some of these running backs, although I do love Johnson, the running back, the little mileage kid from Texas. And we talked about him in our last podcast too. But it's hard to find offensive linemen. It's hard to find centers that probably can play guard as well.
Yeah.
But the intelligence, the savvy, the veteran maturity that he seems to play with week in and week out in the Big Ten against some very good defensive linemen, I don't know if you can pass that by. But you also have to look and see, okay, if we don't take a swing at him here, let's say in the second round, we go with your scenario, I'm going to take the running back here. And you need a center guard combination that should, and I think this kid can come in and start his rookie year. But there's not a lot of center guard combinations that you're in love with after him. Then you better take the guy that you love.
No, that's right. You talked me into it. That's why you're you and I'm me. Fair enough. All right. No, I like John Michael Schmitz. I had him as a day 2 guy. Deion Henry out of Washington State is a fun young man to watch play football.
Very good football player. One of the funnest tape evaluations that I did this fall. He's very athletic. There's no question that he can play on 3 downs. He has a nose for the football. He attacks everything down here, shoots gaps, makes plays, can be over aggressive at times and take himself out of plays. But I love this kid's athleticism. I love his instincts. I love the intensity that he plays with. And I know when I'm grading linebackers, you put him as 3-down linebackers or 2-down linebackers, and the 3-down linebackers have a lot more value because this kid, I think, can play in nickel situations as well. And he reminded me some a little bit of someone who wasn't talked about a lot, but I thought was a very good football player when he came out of Ohio State. A little bit of like a Pete Warner type. Was productive, made a lot of plays, not a lot of pub behind his name. But, I think he's been having a great career down in New Orleans, although I know he's banged up a little bit this year.
Yeah, Henley. I called him Henry. His last name's Henley. And Dayon, the kid we're talking about from Washington State, I'm looking at my notes here. If defensive linemen keep him clean, he will shoot gaps and blow up plays all day long. That seems like a positive. He's not looking to run around blocks. And let me ask you about that just in general. When you see off-ball linebackers do 230-ish, 235-ish, and they're running around blocks, that has to be a concern for you. But is that something you can work around, or is the athleticism coming into play?
All these linebackers run around blocks at the college level. None of them know really how to use their hands to take on blocks at the point, except some of the two-gap type guys. And we haven't talked about Sewell from Oregon yet, but I wasn't probably his biggest fan as the media is making him out to be, because I think he's a two-down linebacker, and he's a heavy-handed kid. But this kid also, because of his athleticism, I thought he had an effect on a quarterback when they did blitz him. So I think he can affect the game in a lot of different ways, not only with his speed and his sideline to sideline range, but with his athleticism and coverage, his athleticism when they do run him on blitzes to affect the quarterback and disrupt the quarterback's rhythm. So I think this kid is going to be one of those names that you hear, and I think it'll be fun to watch him down at the Senior Bowl, because I believe he is going down to the Senior Bowl. So I can't wait for the Senior Bowl this year, because a lot of these kids we're talking about that may not be well-recognized names are going to make a name for themselves down at the Senior Bowl. I think this will be one of those kids.
I thought you were going to say you couldn't wait for the Senior Bowl because it'll be your first year with me at the Senior Bowl. So that could be also.
Yeah. I've been, I can't sleep at night. I'm so excited to get down there.
Oh, yeah. So that'll be something to look forward to for sure. So I had him as a late day 2, early day 3 guy, only because he's a little older. Now, if he were 22, I'd probably be like a day 2 guy. Is there any concern about the age? He's a 6-year senior.
Is he under 25?
I didn't have his birthday. I only got the 6-year senior part, so I don't have that yet. I'm guessing he is.
Okay. Our age alert was when they turned 25 years old in their rookie year. So if he's under 25, it wouldn't be a concern.
Okay.
If he was 25, then that is definitely a little bit of a concern.
But I'm with you. I love the football player, and I'm looking forward to seeing him as well. All right. Your last guy is edge rusher Thomas Incoom out of Central Michigan, 6'2", 261-ish. And he's a grown man. Yeah,
I'm kind of anxious to see how tall he is.
Okay.
But I don't know if he's 6'1" or if he's 6'4". I've looked at all kind of different estimates out there. We'll find out here in a couple of weeks. But this is a guy that loves to play the game. The way his first step quickness is off the snap. First game I put on was against Oklahoma State, and he had 1 or 2 sacks that game. He chased down the quarterback. He was disruptive in the run game. This guy made plays all over the field. And then I was like, oh, God, let me watch him against Penn State, because your guy that went back that was a top 5 pick, and this kid had some pretty good snaps against. It was a heck of a battle. And, Ola had his hands full in this game. But I love this kid's motor. I love this kid's energy. And I love this kid's first step quickness, because he has a unique ability to get a jump on a snap and beat through and work through the edges of these offensive tackles. And I think he's going to be one of those kids that pop out down at the Senior Bowl as well.
And you can speak to this, Rick. I remember Scott Pioli telling me this last year at the Senior Bowl, that those one-on-one blocking drills, those favor the defense, because you don't have a guard and a center to help you out if you're the tackle. It's just one-on-one, and if you get beat, it looks much worse than it will be in reality. But those things sort of leave impressions on you as you go through the process. And this feels like one of those situations where he could have success in those one-on-one drills. But I think you're exactly right. I don't know how tall he is either. I'm looking at my notes here. He plays like with a low center of gravity, so he's sort of hard to handle in that sense if you're a big 6'5", 6'6" offensive tackle. And the things he was able to do, the way you were talking about it, if Anadike Uzama had those skills as a 5-tech, I feel like he would be almost a complete package, because it feels like Incoom plays better Not necessarily out wide, although he's lined up as a 7 before, but he plays better as a 4 or 5 technique.
I would agree a little bit, but I also think when they do line him up wide, because of his ability to bend and torque his body, he has a real natural feel. And again, that's why I'm anxious to see how long his arms are and how tall this kid is. But once he gains the edge or the outside shoulder of an offensive tackle, he has a great sense of where the quarterback is in the pocket. And the other thing is that he has a burst to finish. And once he gets through that edge, this guy can close on a quarterback regardless of who it is. And, he shows his speed. I mean, I saw in the Oklahoma State game, he's chasing down a quarterback halfway across the field and ran him down. So this kid will be fun to watch as we get down there.
All right. Those are your 3 guys, just good football players. They're not guys. They're just good football players.
Do you have any 3 guys that are just good football players?
They are. We'll see if they're as good as your guys. We'll have to match them up. This might be a part of the $1 bet. Who goes first among these 2? We got that running list, by the way. Debo's got that list going. So we'll see how that plays out as we get through this process here. My first guy is Kalijah Cansey, the defensive lineman out of Pitt. He's listed, and we'll find out, he's listed 6 feet even at 275. So he's a little light for an interior guy. Played a lot of 3 tech, did some 0 and 1 tech as well. Sometimes they kick him out wide at 5 tech, but not very often. My overall note was he has a lethal swim move at the snap, and when paired with his twitchiness, makes him almost impossible to stop through the A gap. But the question is, can he play at 275 at the next level? And that's more of a question for you than for me. But it's one of those guys where you don't have any expectations going in, and they keep flashing, and you're like, okay, this is fun. I don't know if he's listed at only 275, 280. He looks about like that on tape. He can sometimes try to get around blocks to make plays instead of taking on the offensive lineman, was one of the issues. And if he doesn't win with twitch off the snap, he can struggle sometimes to get home if those bigger offensive linemen lock up on him. But the motor's there. He feels like a guy who absolutely loves playing football. And when you have that twitch and he's able to be so disruptive between the A gaps, that gets your attention. But I'll ask you just in general, 6'0", 275, what are you thinking about when you're talking about a 0 to 3 tech?
Yeah, this was a kid that I was actually very excited to go watch when Pitt came down and played Miami. And then I lost my excitement and enthusiasm when he didn't play because he was hurt.
I didn't know that.
So just note to self as you sit there and finalize this. But I did love the kid's energy that he plays with, but he has to be in the right scheme, and he'll probably be a situational type guy, maybe give you some inside pass rush because of his twitch. But if you think you're going to line this guy up inside and he's going to take on double teams, he's going to take on combo blocks, he's going to get mashed up at the NFL. So if you're drafting this kid, you better like small defensive linemen because it's a big man's game up there. And he's probably going to be a situational guy if he's anything at all. But I struggle with guys this size that you're going to say he's going to come in, he's going to play 60 snaps for you. He's not. And he better not be in a scheme that doesn't fit what he does best. And that's just getting up the field and try to disrupt and get penetration off the snap. Because if you're going to ask him to sit there and hold the point and keep the guard in the center or whatever combination blocks he's going to have to face, so the linebackers can make plays. He's the one that's going to end up blocking the linebackers because he's going to be knocked off 5 yards off the ball.
And that's an important thing to remember because I was very much enjoyed watching him play, but there has to be a fit for him. So even though the plays, the games that I watched, he was at times dominating, it's against college opponents. That doesn't necessarily translate when you're playing on the inside there. So what might look like day 2 talent might end up being day 3 reality because of the limitations that you've mentioned size-wise. Correct.
Yeah. And I would, not that they played against them, but my good football player, I would put my money on Michael Schmidt if he had to sit here and block this kid one-on-one all day.
Right. No, and that's a fair point. And it's always important not to think about these kids in a vacuum, but in terms of how they may actually look once they get on the field. All right.
That's part of scouting. Just note to self.
Right. Just not the sort of the pie in the sky, what you think will happen. You might want to think about what's actually going to happen once they get on the field. Here's a guy that I know you're going to love, and I'm surprised he was on your list. This guy is a just good football player. Tommy Eichenberg, the linebacker out of Ohio State, I think you called him a throwback. And I feel like that's the highest compliment you can pay this young man. Again, he ain't going to run a 4.3 or 4.4. He's not like my guy Ryan Shazier coming out of Ohio State, who was a track star. It felt like different body type, everything. He will take on blocks, and he is a sideline to sideline guy because of his motor, not because of his speed. And he even, and I mentioned this to you when we talked earlier, coverage is going to be an issue, granted, but he was running. He got beat in the middle of the field in cover 2. I think he was playing the middle linebacker role, and he got beat down the seam there by a track star, one of the Georgia wide receivers. But he didn't get beat by 3 steps. He only got beat by half a step, which led me to believe that was better than I thought in terms of the athletic limitations. But Tommy Eichenberg is a guy who's going to come in and play special teams. He can play situationally. He's probably going to be like your 2-down guy that you were talking about, and probably a good locker room guy based on the way he works. He seems the report he has with his teammates and the way he carries himself on the field.
And probably he's going to be the one making all the calls and adjustment because he's a smart football player too. And I agree. He is just a throwback football player. And I always kidded my brother too, because he couldn't run and he couldn't test well either. But there's no one that was going to beat him to the sideline because of his instincts and how quickly that he can react to what he's seeing that's happening in front of him. The only guy I've seen that ran past my brother, but he ran past a lot of guys, was Bo Jackson.
Whatever happened to him?
Chris said Bo knows that he's fast. Chris said that was the only guy that I could not get to the sideline before he turned the corner up the field. But this kid is just a throwback, good football player. You got to also understand, as much as you love watching him on tape, that you got to understand his limitations. You got to be able to project how is he going to match up versus the athletes. And, of course, when someone has a infatuation with a player like you have with this kid, the track star, he must have ran under 10-second 100 meters, according to you, because it's funny listening to all the scouts in the meetings. I could always tell when they loved the player and whoever they were going against. Well, that guy has to be the fastest guy on Georgia football team, and he was only a half a step behind him. So
you've heard that before.
I do recognize that this kid's intelligence, this kid's instincts, and this kid's he's a very, very good football player. Just the athletic limitations and how he's going to be able to match up at the next level.
It warms my heart to know that you've heard these. Me trying to spin these tales. These aren't the first time you've heard this.
That antenna went right up as soon as you said sprinter, fastest guy ever to play at the University of Georgia.
That's
and
right.
He was only a half a step behind him.
Well,
Red flag.
If you love Eichenberg, you're gonna. I don't know what you're gonna think about my guy Sidney Brown, whose brother Chase Brown is the running back. Chase Brown is the running back in Illinois, who's gotten most of the pub on that side of the ball. The defensive side of the ball, we've talked about Devin Witherspoon. We talked last week or 2 weeks ago, about the slot corner / safety that plays in the secondary, who's going to be the Senior Bowl that we're looking forward to seeing. And then also Sidney Brown, who plays closer to the line of scrimmage. The problem is he's listed at 5'10", 205, which means he might not be even that. And, you don't want your safeties to be 5'2". We don't want a bunch of Pete Priscos running out there, but he can play apex. He can play in the slot. He can play the deep half if you need him to, and plays in 1 high, 2 high looks. He's at his best closer to the line of scrimmage, which is what you've said previously. We talked about him either as an apex defender or in the slot. And I get miniature Talanoa Hufanga vibes, the USC kid who was a day 3 guy, who is a missile. And I feel like Sidney Brown is willing to throw his body around on special teams and close to the line of scrimmage. He'll take on blocks, even if against offensive tackles on the edge, and he's willing to make plays. He can guard up, man up on some tight ends and coverage on short and intermediate routes. I like that about him. He can blitz off the edge. He's shown that capability at Illinois, and he just feels like a football guy who's going to be roster spot 42 to 53 that comes in and does the dirty work for you on Sundays.
Okay. I did like this kid as a football player. Here's some questions I have on him. Okay.
All right. What are they?
I thought they play, when you watch Illinois and their DBs, they're in man coverage almost every snap. So this kid was on the tight end a lot. And the one guy I wanted him to see match up was against the Iowa tight end, Laporte, who I think is a very good tight end. And he held his own, and that was a great battle. If you want to go back and watch the game tape on that, that was a fun battle to watch. This kid's tough. He's physical. He went out with a bang in the Northwestern game. He had a pick six. He also picked up, I think, a 63-yard fumble return for a touchdown. So he scored twice on defense, which tells you what kind of football player he is. The biggest concern I have with him is, and which you don't see, is that when he has to play in the deep half of the field, does he have the range and athleticism to do it? I'm not questioning the type of football player he is on the field when he's close to the line of scrimmage, or as you referred to, I believe, Apex, and that's not the old athletic company, right? The Apex sweatsuits and things like that. You're talking about at the point of attack, I'm assuming.
Yeah, right.
But I do have concern because I didn't see it when he has to play in the deep half of the field or play out in space. What's that going to look like?
Right. No, that's fair. Absolutely. And that's why these are just good football players and not guaranteed top 5 picks. And that's sort of part of the process. We try to cover all the bases here. And I think it's the first good go at round 1 of just good football players. Trademark Pat pending. Now, Rick, it's time for our favorite segment, Rick's Picks. And I will say this has been incredibly popular. Christian Darrisaw and Justin Jefferson, those versions of the Rick's Picks are 2 of our most popular. And it's sort of funny that Darrisaw is up there neck and neck with Justin Jefferson in terms of popularity, because obviously one's a skill position player and others an offensive tackle. But, Vikings fans are smart, and they know that Darrisaw was a great selection. And maybe one day it'll be as good a pick as Harrison Smith, who is, that's a home run. 4-year starter at Notre Dame. He was a linebacker. Consensus second-rated safety behind Mark Barron. Mark Barron's career certainly didn't last as long as Harrison Smith. He came out of Alabama. He ran a 4.57 at the combine, and that's noteworthy for a couple reasons. I want to get your thought on this. Safeties running the 4.6s is not the end of the world. It's also not the end of the world for wide receivers, although we tend to get caught up in that stuff. Cooper Kupp ran a 4.62 or something. So just something to keep in mind. And you actually traded up to 29. So I want to get the thought on this. In the 2012 draft is when Harrison was taken. And you get the trade with the Ravens. You sent 35 and 98 to Baltimore. They turned into Courtney Upshaw and Gino Gradkowski. I would say you get the most of that deal. So take us through the process of Harrison Smith, and then throughout the conversation, explain to us if you got nervous there when you decided to move back up to 29.
No, this was a totally different scenario than a couple of the other scenarios that we talked about. That year, we didn't have a great season. Our coaching staff coached the Senior Bowl, and Harrison Smith was on our roster for the Senior Bowl. So we got an opportunity to sit with him in all the meetings. Our coaches got an opportunity to coach him for a week. There was no question after we had our personnel evaluations of the kids that we coached at the Senior Bowl that Harrison Smith's intelligence, his work ethic, his knowledge of the game, the copious notes that he took in the meetings during that time were second to none. And the reason why he is such a good, now he would fit into the good football player category.
Right.
And I believe in Notre Dame, his junior year, he ended up with like 7 interceptions because just like we talked about the kid from Alabama earlier, although I don't think he's in the same class as Harrison Smith.
Jordan Battle.
Yeah, he had Harrison didn't have as many interceptions his last year as he did his the previous year at Notre Dame. But really stood out to us was the intelligence, especially at that position, because what we found out, and the closer you are to the ball, which means your quarterback, your running back, your center, your linebacker, and your safety, those have to be the smartest guys on the football field for you. And Harrison was doing all the checks, even though you could only play cover 1 and I believe cover 3 in the Senior Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
But when we were doing some things with him in our scheme, he was making all the checks, all the calls that we would expect him to make if we did end up drafting him. So after that Senior Bowl, we did not talk to Harrison Smith until the day I called him and said that we just drafted you.
Was that intentional?
That was intentional. We did not meet with him at the combine. We did not go to his pro day. We did not bring him in on a top 30 visit. We did not talk to him before the draft. The only contact I think we had with him was our scouts call all the prospects and make sure we have the right phone number for them on draft day. And then when we got into the draft, we knew we were going to have to move up to get him because we felt that strongly about him and how he would fit in our scheme. And so we end up moving up, picking him in the first round. When I called Harrison Smith and actually talked to him, I don't think he expected us. I think he was under the impression that we didn't like him at all after the Senior Bowl because we never said another word to him until we ended up trading up and going to get him.
But that's what you wanted to happen because he could be. And Patrick Mahomes has talked about this. I think he talked about it on the Jason Kelce, Travis Kelce podcast about how he actually called Matt Nagy when he was with Kansas City and said, "Hey, I think some team that's ahead of the Chiefs is going to draft me," because they had developed a relationship through the draft process. And I'm pretty sure the Chiefs traded up to get Patrick Mahomes that year.
They did.
Right. So there was some conversation and teams knew that the Chiefs liked Patrick Mahomes, and it worked out well for them, obviously. But, you know, if Harrison Smith had said to another team, Team X, "Hey, by the way, the Vikings have been talking to me for the last 3 months," that may have had an impact.
Yeah, and the one thing that usually when we're interviewing these kids or we bring them in on the top 30, it's like, where other teams have you visited? Or, you know, we had all of our interns are now what you refer to as associates in the building. Their job was to basically read through all the clips every day to try to track where all these players were going on their top 30 visits, or trying to find out, you know, in the media, these kids will talk about, well, who they met with at the combine. So we were so sold on Harrison Smith right after the Senior Bowl that our strategy for him was, we're done. We're not even talking about him. The next time we're going to talk about him, we'll talk about him in the draft meetings because we have to read the reports and we have to talk about him there. But other than that, we are not going to have any contact with his agent, have any contact with the kid, because we didn't want to tip our hand to anyone. So if someone called Harrison Smith and they said, well, who else has been talking to you? Our name wasn't mentioned at all. And because we didn't talk to him. So he didn't have any idea how interested we were in him. And that's kind of how we ended up getting Harrison.
All right, so let's think about this. So you guys, the Vikings, took Matt Khalil for the offensive tackle out of USC. And then you were sitting at 35 at the top of the second round, and you moved up to 29. So A.J. Jenkins, the wide receiver of San Francisco, went after the 29th pick. Doug Martin, the running back out of Boise State. David Wilson, the running back out of the Virginia Tech, with the Giants. Brian Quick, the wide receiver. Kobe Fleener, the tight end. And then Courtney Upshaw, who we just mentioned, went at 35. So obviously you were concerned about someone coming up and getting Harrison Smith. Was there a backup plan? Had you stayed put at 35 and Harrison had been off the board? Do you remember what that was? Or was Harrison going to be the guy?
No, Harrison was going to be the guy. We just were sold on him and thought that he was such a unique prospect because of the intelligence and how important that is at the safety position, that we were going to do what we had to do to trade up to get him. And to get him in the first round also was important for us as well because of that fifth-year option. That's
it. Okay, that's right. That's a great point. Typically, we talk about that with quarterbacks, but it works for every position. And in Harrison Smith's case, it turns out to be that was a layup. You crushed that one. You've crushed a lot of these Rick's picks.
Yeah, you haven't picked any of the Rick's bad picks yet. I'm sure we'll get into a segment of that too.
Until season 4, we have so many good picks to get through. So we're crushing it right now. All right, that is it. We ran a little long today. We didn't have a podcast last week, so we went a few minutes long. That's okay. Rick, as always, thank you. That's a wrap on episode 5. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, leave a 5-star review, give us a thumbs up on YouTube. And if you enjoyed it, tell a friend. If you hated it, tell an enemy. Either way, just tell somebody. Rick, good talking to you, and we'll chat next week.
Yeah, as Pete Prisco says, you can't wish anyone Happy New Year because New Year's is over now. So the day after New Year's, you can't say that. So
Pete is is a grumpy Gus. Let's just leave it at that. All right, guys. See you next week.